Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stedman podcast. It is so great to be with you guys here today. Hope your week has been well, especially since we are kind of only a few weeks into the new year of 2023. And with me is Micah Current. Micah, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Can't believe that it's 2023, and I can't believe that time is just ticking, man. It's just we've had some weird weather here in Ohio for the last couple of weeks, and it feels like spring, but I'm not getting my hopes up. And but yeah, it's good to be here. Happy New Year.
Yeah. Now, are you still writing 2022 on things, or have you finally converted to writing 2023?
Actually, I've only done it a couple of times, and I've been really good about 2023 so far. And I don't know why. I usually screwed it up really badly.
Yeah, no joke. I haven't written anything yet. Like, usually the only time I would write it would be like on checks, and it's weird because very rarely do we write checks anymore.
Right.
Or sometimes, if anything, I'm writing them, like if I'm doing a newsletter to my youth parents, I'll put like important dates, and I'll always put the year there. I don't know why, just because I don't want them to think like, oh, January 8th of last year, why would I send my kid to something that already happened? But then it's like, oh, I should probably fix that so they're not confused.
Do you use Google for stuff like Google Suite and Gmail and things like that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you noticed this, but like Miami, where I work, we use Google for everything. But when you write emails and stuff now, everything auto populates.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've noticed that. So I don't know if that's going to be helpful for us with this new new year and everything, but maybe it'll just auto populate it and you won't have to worry about writing it incorrectly. But to your point about the check, I couldn't tell you right. The last time that I wrote a check, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long time, but yeah, so it's definitely the beginning of the year, and already there's just been some weird stuff happening. So that brings us to our Stories Gone Wild segment. Oh man. So you got a story, Micah?
Yes, but I don't think that it's too wild or weird.
Okay.
And I don't think that it's not more in reference to the church stuff, but it's more like personal.
Yeah.
So a couple of weeks ago, Scott, you moved back to Ohio. You know that we had this crazy ice storm / snowstorm / they considered it, I think in Cincinnati, they considered it a blizzard. It was categorized, it did enough damage that it was considered a blizzard. So it was like, I don't know, Thursday. It was supposed to come in Thursday and like be done by Friday night. And we were getting these wind chill warnings. We were getting these snowstorm warnings, winter weather advisories, etc. And Thursday night, when we all went to bed, it was, I want to say like 50 degrees. And then it dropped like 40 degrees in like 3 hours. And so we had all this snow, and we were supposed to get like 2 to 3 or 3 to 5 inches of snow, but because the winds were so bad, it was just going to blow all over the place. And because it was raining and the temperature dropped so quickly, it turned into ice. So we get all these winter weather advisories, and then my wife and I are like, you know what? We're just going to order pizza. We're not going to mess with this. We're just going to go to bed. The next morning, it's like -10, and we had like a wind chill advisory for like 3 days. And like, I'm like, where are we? Minnesota? No, we're in Ohio. So my wife and I have a really nice home, and we have kind of our layout is 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. And for the first time in our marriage, we only have 1 bathroom because the pipes froze. Thankfully, they didn't bust, but we have 3 bathrooms, and 2 of our toilets didn't work. 2 of the sinks didn't work. Our dishwasher didn't work, and our washing machine didn't work from, I think, Friday until the following Tuesday. And then Christmas was on Sunday. We couldn't go anywhere because the roads were so bad. Like, we were going to go to my in-laws for our Christmas with them, and they live in Dayton, and it's about 35 minutes away from our home. And we drove from Trenton to Middletown, which traditionally would take about 10 to 15 minutes. We got on the road on Sunday, on Christmas Day, and it was so bad that it took us 45 minutes to get to Middletown from Trenton. And I'm like, it's going to take us 3 hours to get to Dayton when it would take 35 minutes. They only have one lane to the interstate open. So anyway, the long and short of it is that the weird piece of that is that, I think for the first time since I was, I don't know, maybe a little kid, when my parents only had one bathroom in their home, was the first time that we've ever had just one bathroom. And so we were texting with my my in-laws, and they were telling us that one of their toilets had frozen. I think they have three bathrooms as well. But we put space heaters in there, and thankfully our pipes didn't bust, because that would have been a disaster. But the Alicia and I just kept walking around the house, going, first world problems, because we only have one bathroom. And I know that's not a weird story, but it's just like the idea of having just like one toilet, one sink, and one shower, when we normally have 2 bathtubs, 2 showers, 3 showers, and all those bathrooms and stuff like that. But like, man, I don't know how those people up north do it. That's just a way of life for them, apparently.
Well, and that's the crazy thing, because when again, living in Columbus, like, we didn't leave to go visit family until Sunday after church, which we did have services. We didn't cancel any of our services during that. And we still had like a ton of people showing up, but
more than Christmas Day.
Yeah, more than Christmas Day. But the cool thing was that I'm driving in Columbus, and again, I'm taking 270 to 71. These are big interstates, and they were awful. Absolutely awful. And I'm thinking, what in the world is happening here? So now that I hit 71 North and I'm making my way up towards Northeast Ohio, I get to the Delaware exit, which is just one exit above where Polaris is, which is where IKEA Way is and everything else. And then from there all the way up, everything was spotless and cleared. No issues, no slush, no still frozen remnants of ice or snow. Everything was completely cleared. And I'm thinking, well, Northeast Ohio definitely knows how to deal with their snow stuff, because obviously Central has no clue. And I guess apparently Southwest Ohio definitely has no clue how to take care of the roads either.
Well, I think part of it though was that it was so icy. It's hard to, and with it being so cold, it was harder to treat the roads as they were, because they were just ice. I remember there was a storm last, this is before you moved back to Ohio, Scott, but like there was a storm that happened last like February or March. We didn't leave our houses. They closed the university for 2 days because the ice was so bad. We got like an inch of ice, and nobody could do anything because of how much ice was on the roads, and they can't treat it because of how cold it was. So I don't know. My dad lived in the north, and he lived in North Dakota for 10 years, and they said that they didn't salt roads and stuff like they do here. They just pack the snow down and you drive on the snow. So I want to move south.
Well, I want to move south, because once you do get hit by that big snow, then everything shuts down and no one knows what they're doing. And everybody's like, that's one of the things that drove me nuts living in the South, is that people would start driving on the roads and a little bit of snow would fall on the ground. And it was just like 65 miles per hour immediately goes to like 2, and everybody has their flashers on, and it's like everyone's moving slow. And I'm thinking, I'm from Ohio, move out of my way. Like, I'm like lacing threads and shoelaces and just flying through there like crazy, because it's like, guys, it's just snow. It's okay. It just started. It hasn't been like packed yet. It hasn't melted and turned to ice yet. It's not even cold enough to freeze yet. It's only 35 degrees. Like, come on, keep going. But yeah, I think my weird story kind of goes around that time frame too, with the snow thing. Is we finally drive up and we make our way up to Ohio, and we're staying with my parents, and we're kind of having Christmas up there. And a lot of times, like, my dad likes to do a gift with one of the grandkids where he gets to do like some woodworking. And last year, him and my son ended up making like a wooden like box, like chest thing for him to put his toys in. So, that was fun. And my son got to learn how to drill and do. So it was really cool. They got to work together, build something. So it was really awesome. Well, my dad decided that for my nephew, he was going to make a shield, a big, gigantic wooden shield with like our family crests on it. Okay. So that's cool. So my sister's filming this because she's like, oh, this is going to be very exciting because my dad made it. And, my nephew's going to be very excited. So my nephew goes, he pulls out this shield and everything else. And my dad's explaining it to him and everything else. And it's great. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then my dad says, oh, there's more stuff in there. So then my nephew starts pulling stuff out of this box. And now my nephew is now carrying a sharp knife that's about the size of like a Crocodile Dundee knife. And I'm like sitting here and you just see my eyes get big. Like here's a 9-year-old wielding a very sharp knife, or my dad saying, be careful because it's really sharp. You could really hurt yourself. And he's just like, I'm just sitting there. And the whole entire time, like my filter's gone at this point. And so he pulls out that knife, and then I start making my jokes like, oh, you call that a knife? This is a knife. And my sister's filming. It's like dying laughing. And then he goes, oh, hold on, there's more. And then he pulls out this other knife, which is like an old vintage knife from like somebody's dad. And it's all rusted. And I go, Danielle, make sure you got his tetanus shots up to date. My sister's like dying laughing. And then my dad goes, yeah, and to hold your knives, you need a belt. And then he pulls out this belt and he like puts the knives around the belt and he buckles it. And the very sharp knife is dangling by my nephew's private areas. I'm like, whoa, we don't need him to get circumcised twice. And my sister, again, is still filming all of this. And then he goes, and now if you're going to be wearing your knives, you need a pair of pants. And now there's a pair of pants in this box. At this point, I'm just like, okay, you need to wear pants now because we don't want to walk around with our knives naked, dangling from our waist. I mean, I'm just going on a roll. My sister's crying at this point. And then he says, and now you can go and help Papa. Like this whole point of this gift was the shield. And now it's like the knives, the belt, the pants. And then he goes, now you can help Papa help work in the weeds, like on the, like help Papa with some work, like with the weeds and stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, you need to go and work on the Stedman compound. And my sister's like, except I didn't say compound. I said something else. My sister was like, now I can't post this because what you said was so offensive. And it's like, what? It's not offensive what I said. So anyway, I had to go on the phone that my sister recorded on and edit out that last comment. And then my dad gets on the phone and he edits out everything else so that it's just my nephew picking up the shield so he can put like a nice little, oh, my son has like a warrior's heart and everything. It's just my nephew pulling up the shield, and that's all the video. Nothing about opening up the knives, the belt, the pants. But so all that information, all that comedy gold that I just clearly gave everybody is now deleted into the interspace because of one word I said.
Well, the two things I could think of when I when I heard you share your story, Scott, was that one was, did you ever see Crocodile Dundee?
Yes, I have.
When he was like, now that's a knife.
Yeah.
Kept thinking of that when you told that story. And then the other was my great grandmother, when she was still alive, towards the end of her life, had Alzheimer's. And we would go to her house every year for Christmas. And towards the end of her life, she loved to give people gifts. But we really started to notice her her Alzheimer's towards the end of her life when all of us great grandchildren were like, all right, why am I getting men's perfume or men's cologne for Christmas, or why are the boys getting Barbies, and why are the girls getting race cars? Like they're like, seriously, those things happen.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah.
Like when you kept saying that, like the story just kept getting added to, hey, you need pants and you need this. And
here's a rusted knife that you can have, like,
and a tetanus shot.
Yeah, so it was just I mean, it is. I think that's the great thing about sometimes with families is sometimes, there's those weird moments where you're just kind of going, oh, that's a little odd, but then for other people it's just like hilarious. And I mean, I've been on the end with my grandma where she sent us, me and my sister, gifts that you could tell like, why did I get this? But yeah, so anyway, as we transition to our main topic today, we've been I with the new year coming up, it made me think about, how churches approach trying to encourage or instruct or even set up their congregations for the new year. Um, you know, kind of, I think, I mean, and a lot of this, I think, kind of goes back to the things I would see at the beginning, actually towards the end of 2019, where it seemed like every single pastor that I was friends with on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you want to say, was all about, ooh, our theme for next year is going to be 2020 vision. And what are some big things God can do in 2020? And I guess no one saw that coming, but what happened in 2020? But that was always a big thing. Like, it was like everyone was gearing up to do these big things to start off the next year by either encouraging their people. Maybe there's a certain like vision or mission that they want to try to accomplish this year. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about that. So like, the churches you've worked for, Micah, what were some of the experiences you've had when it came to the beginning of a new year, and how did church leaders would approach talking about, or did they even do anything that was like any New Year's related or new mission, new year, new you, all that stuff?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. There, excuse me, one of the churches I worked for, every January we would do this series called Keep Knocking, and it was a series focused on prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would do the entire month of January and just focus on prayer and kind of man, I'm so sorry. We would kind of realign our focus and focus on prayer for that first month of the new year, coming out of the holidays. And then in February we would dive into a series which would really focus on our mission and our vision. And one year, I'm looking it up as we're talking, but in 2020, before COVID, it was Vision 2020 Dare to Be was the series that we did. And we talked about the vision of the church and what we were going to do, and really cast vision for that next year. And then the following year, after the Keep Knocking series, we did a series called Be Transformed Vision 2020 or something along those lines. And looking right now as we're talking, yes, Be Transformed Focus 2020. So really just focusing on, what's our mission statement. Are we changing that mission statement? If not, this is the mission statement, and this is what we're going to try to do this year. Excuse me. And really cast vision for the upcoming year. I like the idea of starting the new year off with like a focus on prayer and vision casting, especially when you think about new people that may be coming into the church and might have visited during the holidays or we're looking for a church home. Mm-hmm. You really want to pitch that idea of what we believe and why. And I think you and I shared this on an episode about the idea that we once a year should do a 4 to 6 week series on this is our vision and what we believe and why. Whether it's Church of God, Anderson, or whether it's the church that you serve, people need to know what you believe. Even if you're a non-denominational church, like, okay, these are things that we really need to talk about, like salvation and baptism and what's communion. Why do we do communion? What is, some of the other ordinances that we've talked about in other episodes, but like really aligning our thoughts and our minds with what we believe and why, and then being able to share that with people that may or may not understand it, may or may not have that relationship with Jesus, and then may be brand new to your current ministry situation and are looking for a church home long term, and they've only visited maybe once or twice right during the holidays. So it's a good idea to do that stuff during the beginning of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and I think, I'm thinking back to all the times where I've had to preach on a New Year's service, or usually the day after New Year's, because depending on where New Year's falls, sometimes, services are pretty low, low attendance. But I mean, I can remember just kind of some more historical things. Like I can remember launching a new vision, kind of new mission, new vision for the church on a New Year's at the beginning of the year. I do remember when I was an interim at a small church in Windham, I ended up preaching on the concept of New Year's and kind of the whole idea of leaving the past behind and kind of embracing this new year of hopes and dreams and opportunities, and how we kind of live our faith that way, where, we want to live a life that's obedient to God, or maybe we want to try to overcome a certain struggle or sin that we're dealing with. And once we get about a month or two into it, we kind of fall back to our old patterns, and then we just kind of wait till next year, and kind of connected that to the experience of camp ministry, where I've had kids who come down to give their lives to Christ each year because they're still struggling with the same addictions or the same issues that they came from the year prior. And it's like, you can go to the Lord anytime, and really,
it doesn't have to be in the church, like in the physical sanctuary. Yeah.
And it's it's the same thing. Like, you don't have to wait till next year to try to start again. Like, you can always start again. I think I even used the passage of the forgiveness of sins, not 7 times, but 77. It was one of my first sermons, so I don't think it was that great, looking back on it now. But what made it memorable is my sister happened to attend church there because she wanted to see me preach, and it struck her so much that she ended up kind of giving her life to Christ. So I got to lead her in that, which was wonderful. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of churches who've launched mission statements, or they kind of do a big encouragement thing, or maybe they want to start with a new series like that starts on prayer. And actually go ahead.
No, I was going to say another approach, I guess, if you want to call it an approach, that I've seen done at one of the other churches I used to work at. They did a series like in January called How Big Is Your Butt? And it was just like BUT, not your physical anatomy, but like they talked about, like they did a 4-week miniseries called How Big Is Your Butt? And it was like, I want to have a relationship with my family, but I want to have a relationship with Jesus, but I want to, be better at my be a better parent, but I want to be a better husband or wife. And then right after that, they dived into a series that jumped right into the journey to Easter, depending on when Easter falls too, right?
Yeah.
Like if Easter falls earlier in the year, in the calendar year, they did a series called Exploring Mark, where they did the book of Mark, all 16 chapters. They did an 8-week series like that because Easter fell early that year. They did a series called Exploring Mark, and it just went right from January, the end of January, picked up in February, and went all the way to March or April when Easter was going to happen that year. So that's another approach based on, I guess, when Easter actually falls. So yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I thought.
No, that's great. But and I think there's a lot of things that churches do. And actually, just at the beginning of the year, the church that I work at, one of the things that they do is they do a kind of a covenant, a church covenant, or they call it the Wesleyan covenant. They look at that, they read it, and really, when I looked through this covenant, they do have a thing where you can sign it and date it. The pastor was like, this is not something that we want you to just kind of sign today and turn in. Like, this is something that you need to think about and really process. And and when I looked at the covenant and kind of see like what this covenant asked for, a lot of times it was just like, I commit myself to learning 2 new spiritual disciplines or practicing 2 new spiritual disciplines. I want to grow stronger in my faith. I want to share my faith with others. And then, I want to help serve missions in this community. And then I think there was one where it was like, be generous towards my neighbor, be generous to the stranger. And then of course, be generous to the church by, participating in church, coming to church regularly, and, or, giving to the church. So it's like this long covenant. And it made me really think, because it was a different covenant that I've been used to, because there's been times where I've seen covenants where they're kind of like one of those things where I'm like, I don't think these are necessarily covenants. They're kind of more contracts, but we just call them covenants because, it's in a church. So let's call them covenants, or we call them covenants because we want it to mean a little bit more powerful or have a deeper meaning than what the actual what's written, or the thing that you want people in the church to sign, which basically doesn't seem as important based on what you're basically trying to get us to sign. So I want to kind of talk about this idea of covenants in some ways, and kind of looking at covenants and kind of, how churches are doing them. Because it seems like, besides like the service I went to at the beginning of the year where we had it, like that's probably the only one where I felt like that was a legit, good, biblically sounded covenant.
Well, talk about that for a second. What was that experience?
So there's been a couple times where,
because I've heard about good covenants and I've heard about not so good covenants as far as churches are concerned.
So I do know. So for an example, and I mean, I know we already talked about the whole Matt Chandler, Matt Chandler again, but when I was reading the book by Scott McKnight and Laura Brenigan, A Church Called Tove, they talked a little bit about how some churches use covenant. So let's say I become a new member of a church, and then I sign what is called a new member covenant, which basically means that I believe in the theology and the doctrine of what this church teaches. I will do my best to attend services regularly and be an integral part of the life of the church. Even it might be a personal thing, like, I signed this covenant to be a good husband and be a good representation of Christ to my family, my coworkers, to people in the church. But then sometimes there's things like, and as a member of the church, and this is what happened with Village Church, is in the covenant, it was like, I will not sue the church or put lawsuit. And of course, they always use the scripture, they'll tie it with scripture where it's like, don't sue your brother, or don't bring a lawsuit against your brother, that we see in the Bible. And so it's stuff like that. And then what happened is that this family sent their daughter to a camp that was run by Village Church. Is kind of like their own summer camp. A situation happened that definitely legal charges need to be brought up, but the family for the longest time felt like they couldn't bring charges against the church because they signed this covenant. And then it wasn't until, dealing with it for 3 years and thinking, this horrible thing happened to our daughter, but we can't say anything because we're tied to this covenant. Someone in their family said, well, just leave the church. Like, just say you're leaving the church, because then you'll have to sign it, and that breaks yourself from the covenant because you're no longer a member of that church. So they did. So once they left the church, they were able to pursue a lawsuit against them. And then when they were talking to the lawyer, they even said, like, hey, if something is a felony or something is a crime, these covenants, these church covenants, don't protect them from felonies.
Sure.
So that was kind of a bad way. Like, that's probably the extreme on one side, the bad way. Kind of where the middle ground is that I've seen times where, Sunday school teachers at churches that I've that I've worked at, or churches when I've come in and I've tried to know their system as a new pastor, and they say, oh yeah, we used to have these Sunday school teachers sign these covenants, which basically meant, oh, if you're going to be a Sunday school teacher for this class, you're going to sign this covenant, which means for a year you're not allowed to leave, that you have to stay a teacher for a year. So even if there was an emergency that happened, let's say death of a family member, or you get sick, it was almost like just the way it was written that, you have to, even if you're sick and you can't be there, it's your responsibility to find someone to do it. Well, if you're in the hospital and let's say you're incapacitated, hold on. Hey, can you sub for me for Sunday school? And then it was just the weirdest thing. And then, even there was talk one time where it's like, well, maybe we should do that for all the people who are serving on these leadership teams. And I'm thinking, yeah, but if you have someone who doesn't show up consistently to a meeting, I think the thing that we need to do is, instead of forcing them, saying, hey, you're breaking the covenant here, you just call them and you say, hey, we noticed you haven't been attending meetings. Is everything okay? Do you still want to pursue? And if not, then it's the elder board's responsibility to go find a replacement for that person to fill out the rest of their term, because obviously a life change has happened, or life happened that they couldn't fulfill to serve their leadership role. But I felt like the covenant system, and when I saw these papers, I'm like, yeah, we're not doing this. I'm like, yeah, we're not doing this. Like, this is, because A, I felt like it was wrong. And B, when I think about a biblical covenant, the covenants we see in the Bible, God's always a part of it. And it's about one's relationship with God. And even if you think about a marriage covenant, like the covenant of marriage, yeah, it's between, two people who are getting married. But at the same time, a lot of theology, it's like, well, it's not two merging together as one. It's the two and God merging as one, as kind of the foundation or the glue that holds that relationship together. But yeah, so that's kind of what I mean by covenant. It seems like we were Sunday at the beginning of the year, it just seemed like a lot of, even though there was some things like, oh, make sure you come to church regularly or be devoted to, doing the mission of being, proactive in the mission of the church. Probably about 3/4 of it was, I'm going to make this covenant. It's going to be between me and God. I'm going to work on having more time with him. I'm going to work on trying a new spiritual discipline. I'm going to, try to live out my understanding of the Bible and of God to the best of my ability. It was very much between you and the Lord. And it wasn't like pastor was saying, okay, you got to sign this and put it in the offering plate today so we can have these documents. Like, take these home, put on the fridge. Like, the church didn't need these back. It was more of like, here's your thing. Pray about it. If you want to sign it and put it up and hang it up so it's a reminder of you to try to live a more holy life, then great. But if you don't want to sign it, that's fine too. Like, the church leadership is not going to be checking in on you and knocking on your door going, hey, are you living according to this covenant? Like, it was very much between one person and God, and that was a private affair between that one person and God. It wasn't a big corporate covenant that I've seen other churches get into. So that's kind of the thing. And again, like, where I had an issue with covenants from the past was when you look at an understanding, especially an Old Testament covenant, it's really, the covenant is something where God makes a promise to mankind, or mankind makes a promise to God. And it was always between God and another person, or maybe God and Israel, if we see a collective group, but it was always, God was always in the mix. Or wasn't like, I've signed this covenant to be devoted to a church. Or even if we're looking at the church as a group of people and not an institution, still a covenant between members of churches was still never a thing. God was always an integral part, or even was the foundation of a covenant. So I'm gonna kind of just stop there and just pass it back to you, and kind of like your thoughts with everything I've been saying about covenants.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say though, like in respect to the Lord and respect to God and things like that, like I Google the word covenant and it says an agreement. The definition literally just says an agreement, right? And so as you were talking, I was looking through, I was flipping through the Old Testament on my Bible here, and I came upon Joshua 21, where God is kind of the war in Israel is kind of coming to a close for that portion of the Old Testament. And if you know the Old Testament, Joshua, is a fierce warrior, and they go through a lot right after the passing of Moses. And anyway, so just an example of that in Joshua 21 in verses 43 through 45, it says, "Thus the Lord gave Israel all the land that he swore to give their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And then the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he sworn to their fathers. Not one of their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass." So I read all that because God was faithful to Israel, and they made a covenant with God. And then when they made that covenant with God and they obeyed God and they remained faithful, God blessed, and God gave them what they needed in that moment, even after all they had been through. So to your point, the covenant was between Israel, Joshua, and the Lord. And the Lord and Joshua and Israel. It had nothing to do with the church. You brought up an interesting point as far as like the idea of, signing this or signing that, or, we've talked a little bit about it, like in staff positions at churches, like with NDAs and things like that. But like the idea of signing something and being committed to something, it almost feels like you're being kind of punished in a way. I don't know if that's, or like shoehorning people into doing something they're not comfortable with doing long term.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. Because if I'm looking at kind of like our main covenants in the Bible, like we have the covenant that God made with Noah after the flood, where God basically kind of does this reset and renews the blessing of creation. We even see God makes a covenant with Noah, basically saying, I'm not going to destroy the world with a flood. And that's why we have the rainbow. It's like a reminder of the covenant that God made with Noah. We have the Abraham covenant, where God makes this covenant with Abraham, which that is an interesting story too, because it's like, okay, this covenant with Abraham that, Israel's going to be blessed. They're going to be, and if they follow his commands and follow his decrees and get circumcised and everything else, and don't intermarry, there's a lot of rules and stuff. But what's interesting about this covenant is when God and Abraham are having this covenant, we see Abraham chop these animals in half, because that's the thing. Like if God breaks the covenant with Abraham, then God can split God from head to foot, right? That's the whole story. So, but the same thing, like, if Abraham breaks the covenant, then God can do the same to him, or at least that's kind of the Old Testament Jewish understanding. And yet we see during this covenant phase, we see God pass through this covenant of blood between him and Abraham. And as Abraham's about to walk through this trail of blood, we see the Spirit of the Lord pass back through again. So Abraham never gets to walk through. It's always God going twice. And how we understand that is, if we understand it from a Old Testament perspective, it's the idea that, because of the sinfulness of man, that there was no way Abraham was going to be obedient to this covenant. There's no way that Israel as a nation was going to be obedient to this covenant because, man, for whatever reason, is going to continue to fall, especially when we look at Old Testament. But then even if we look at a New Testament lens, it's, well, if God's doing the sacrifice, if God passes through twice, and that means that in order to establish a covenant that is going to work, that there has to be a paying a price of shed blood, which is going to come through God himself through the Son, Jesus Christ. We also have the Mosaic covenant, which is the covenant between Moses giving the 10 commandments, but also the law of Moses to the Israelites on how to live. We see the Davidic covenant that in 2 Samuel 7, where God basically promises David not only the reign, the throne of God's people, but that it's the Davidic king is going to be the catalyst for the coming of the Messiah. And then, of course, we have the new covenant, which we read in Luke 22, but also we see in Jeremiah 31. That, when this Messiah comes, or there's this coming day where this new covenant is going to bring the forgiveness of sins, an internal renewal of the heart, and the intimate knowledge of God, which we could look at. Again, I've been studying John 13 through 17 for my doctorate, but even when you think about the role of the Holy Spirit, the role of the Holy Spirit is to help the disciples remember everything Jesus taught, to have this calling to be connected to the true vine, which is Jesus Christ, and to have this intimate knowledge of who God is, who Jesus is, and who the Holy Spirit is. And I feel like when I explain all these like kind of big Old Testament covenants and even the New Testament covenant, it always goes back to God. And never once is it, well, you need to be committed to the church, or here's a covenant. And and unless someone can bring it up to me or make a comment or whatnot, I really don't see a covenant where people, maybe we could look at the Mosaic covenant, but anytime in the New Testament, I don't see any time where people need to be in covenant with one another, with a group of people. It always starts with the covenant relationship with God. And as each people are moving towards God, then that's where the connection with the body happens, because we're all connected to the head, which is Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and I, we haven't really said it, but it feels really bizarre. Like that whole concept is just, it seems bizarre. Like asking people, what if, Scott, you and your family came and do this new church, the second Sunday of January, and they're doing this new series, and they ask you to sign a covenant right off the bat, and it's like, I'm new to church. I don't know Jesus. I'm trying to figure this thing out. I'm trying to, it. Yeah.
Or I'm just trying to find a church home, and all of a sudden it's like, sign this paper, which again, and I actually at that service we had some new visitors show up when we were doing this like Wesleyan covenant thing. And even then, like, it wasn't like, okay, you need to sign this. It's like, here it is, take it home, pray about it if this is something. And it wasn't a commitment to, and that's the thing, like anywhere in the verbiage never said you will be committed to this named church. It's just you participate in a worship setting.
Mm-hmm.
So even if someone was traveling, let's say someone just happened to be in because they're family or friends of somebody in the church, so they decide to go to church before they drive back to Tennessee, they could see this covenant, they could take it home, they could read it, they could pray about it, and they go, you know what, I'm going to sign it. They will sign it. That doesn't mean they're making trips from Tennessee back to Columbus to go to church. They're just finding a church in Tennessee that they're saying, well, I'm going to be a part of it because that's part of this covenant. But again, it was between that person and their discussion with God, not that person and a church leader or the pastor or the congregation as a whole. And it didn't say you must be committed to the views and practices of Village Church or Solid Rock Church or the Church of God or the Wesleyan Church or the Methodist Church or the Lutheran Church. It just says a place of worship or a church.
Right.
And And even with these covenants, like reading through the Old Testament, Israel never kept the covenant. They broke it over and over and over again. And yet, especially when we look at the prophetic books, a lot of times, yeah, God says, hey, you broke the covenant. Here's kind of the consequence of this broken covenant. And yet there's always that grace and mercy clause where if you repent and you turn from your sinful ways, then I am going to restore you. There is always this point where God was always willing to restore the broken covenant if people would turn from their sins. And I feel like when in a church setting, if you sign a covenant and someone messes up or makes a mistake or has a fault or doesn't do anything wrong, they just get sick and they can't keep up with their commitments. It's like the pattern I see with churches is there has to be a meeting. So we're going to have a meeting because you've obviously are not keeping up with this covenant that you signed. So we're going to have a big board meeting about it. And then not only that, we're probably going to kick you out of whatever leadership thing, or maybe we'll just kick you out of the church, depending on what it is. And then the rest of the church, which will shun you and they'll never talk to you again. And you kind of become a ghost. It's almost like, oh, they left our tribe, they left our family. So we're going to kind of cast them out, which I know is a very big, like Amish Mennonite thing of shunning, but man, the American church definitely does shunning very well. I mean, yikes. And that's usually like a lot of times when I'll hear people share their stories of church trauma or anything else. It's like, yeah, I ended up leaving the church, or I was kicked out of the church. I just felt like it was time for me to go. And all these people who said were my friends, and even after I left, they said, oh yeah, we'll still keep in touch. We'll still love you. We'll still call you. It's like completely ghosted.
Yeah.
And it's like, just because I leave a church doesn't mean that we can't still talk or we can't still hang out. We can't still do things. It's like, nope, you're done. Like, that's it in the discussion. So yeah, it's wild.
Well, and I think it also adds pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It adds pressure to faith. It adds pressure to relationships. It adds pressure to the expectation of a church. It adds all these preconceived notions, and you wonder why people aren't coming to church because they're afraid of those things.
Yeah,
they don't have to be afraid of God. They need to be afraid of the people that are putting this barrier between man and God. And, as you were talking about, Scott, I feel like that's exactly what's happening. And the church is creating these barriers, like in the form of covenants where, if you come into a church, like, and I'm brand new and I don't feel comfortable signing this, like, I'm not going to come back. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit disheartening.
It is. And I mean, and I still think it was weird that, working at Church of God Church, that they had a covenant for their leaders, especially when A, leaders are not perfect, and B, the idea that the Church of God believes that if you are if you want to be a member of the church, all you have to have is a relationship with Jesus Christ. Do you believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior? And that's where it is. And I mean, that was the slogan of the church for a long time, where salvation makes you a member. And yet I'm finding that there's these covenants in these years past. I'm like, yeah, we're going to get rid of these. We're not doing these anymore, because if we're going to say salvation is basically to be a member of this church is have a saving relationship with Jesus Christ, then there's no need to have a covenant. There's no need to sign a piece of paper saying, yes, I'm going to commit my life to the church and I'm going to give faithfully to the church and I'm going to do all these things to the church. It's like, well, no, like, first of all, you need to work on a relationship with God. Don't be just pouring all yourself into a local congregation. Pour yourself into God. And as you're pouring yourself into God, because of the blessings that God gives you, then that's going to propel you to be a blessing to your church, whether it's being a teacher, whether it's giving financially, whether it's, especially if it's just church plant, you're probably there at 3:00 in the morning setting up chairs in a middle school cafeteria. So So yeah, but yeah, I think if you're a church, and again, for you church leaders out there, I think if you're a church and you're having people sign covenants, I think you really need to sit back and examine and reread your covenant and go, okay, what is it that I'm actually having people sign? Am I having them sign to be faithful to the church or be faithful to me and my leadership? Or am I having them first be faithful to God and allowing that be the majority or the 90% of the covenant is their devotion and relationship with God, and then the 10% being a devotion relationship to a church. Because I mean, and I don't want to get into talking about tithes and offering, but I mean, if the whole tithing offering is that we get to give God 10% of whatever material earnings we make, then I think when it comes to, if you do have a covenant system, you have to make sure that 90% of your covenant is my devotion and my relationship to God. And then 10% is going to be the work I'm doing for God, whether it's in a local church or whether it's just, sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with people in my workplace or on the street or in the grocery store. I think that's going to be more of a biblically accurate and even a very theological accurate covenant than here, sign this covenant so we can say you're a member of my church, you can be obedient to everything that we believe, and don't sue us if we do something wrong.
Sign this agreement but don't sue us.
Yeah, sign this agreement but don't sue us. No, but we're going to call it a covenant because we're a church, and it's going to have more spiritual value to it than just say, no, what you're doing, you're signing a contract. If you want to be a member here, here's the contract you sign. And I think churches need to stop basically putting the word covenant on something to kind of make it all spiritual when really the stuff that they're signing is anything but. So yeah, that's my final take on that. So friends, thank you so much for listening. And again, maybe if you're a church leader and maybe you do have your church members sign covenants and you're listening to this and you're thinking, you know what? I think you're wrong, Scott. Covenants are very important and people need to sign them and it's important. Please argue with me. Let me know. I want to know your take on it. Just feel free to send me an email. You can go to my website, thescottstedman.com, where you can find all of our episodes and even send an email to me so I can go. Or you can comment on any of our socials, on our YouTube, our Facebook page, anywhere. Just make a comment. So then that way, if you disagree with us, or maybe you agree with us, we can definitely make those comments and just be able to share those on the podcast too and have that dialogue. So thank you so much for listening to us. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend, and we'll be back on with another episode. Take care.